Hey guys, I heard yelling. Is everything okay? It's fine. I'm just trying to film my new movie. Oh wow, I didn't know you were doing a new movie, Arnold. Did you write it? I am the writer, the director, the cinematographer, the editor, and the pilot for the chopper. Wow, talk about wearing a lot of hats. What's it about? It's a modern retelling of a classic fairy tale. Oh, wow. What a coincidence. This week's guest is E.H. Lau, and he does modern retellings of mythology mixed with fairy tales. It's not a coincidence. I read all of his work, and now I'm bringing to life my vision for a brand new story. It's called Jacked and the Beanstalk. It's about a buff guy and his tiny friend. He tries to show him how to work out. Okay, yeah, this is all starting to make sense. Is that why Finton here is greased up like a bodybuilder? Yeah, but he doesn't have good form. He's not jacked enough. I told you 1,000 times, Arnold. I don't do exercise. I'm more of a walk around and muse while having tea type of person. Ooh, we're the Beanstalkses. They know. Why don't you just play the main character, Arnold? I don't think you're going to get Finton as jacked as you want in time to film this. Oh, wow. Why didn't I think of that? Hey, Finton, can you fly a chopper? I'd rather try that than do this for a moment longer. Good. Okay, Bradley, tell everybody about my new movie on the Save This Draft podcast. I need marketing. Sure thing, Arnold. I'll take care of it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 47 of the Saved as Draft podcast. It's been snowing this week here where I live and elsewhere in the US from the sounds of it, so I hope everyone is staying warm. Pro tip, I have these fingerless gloves that I wear during the winter each year, and they are a lifesaver for someone who's pretty much typing all hours of the day for work and for creative projects like me. So, if you're writing it a lot yourself and your house gets cold like mine does, get yourself a pair if it gets cold in the winter and your finger joints will thank you. Not sponsored, but hey, if anybody's listening and you have a fingerless glove company, let me know. Also, I wanted to shout out an author in the community who just recently took the leap into full-time writing, and that is, of course, L.G. Wells, who is known for his cosmic horror and just an all-round, just really positive member of the community. Been here since the beginning, since I joined earlier this year. Fantastic person and an amazing horror writer. He just took the leap into full-time writing and he launched a Ko-Fi. So if you get a chance, take a look at his work, check it out, and if you would like, show some support through the Ko-Fi link there. I'll put it in the show notes. And congrats to LG as well for taking that leap. Really proud of him for doing that, and it's not easy to do. But it will pay off. I feel like so many writers here, once you hit that point where you're ready to take that leap, you have the talent and the skill and the drive to do it. So I believe in you, and I believe in LG. So let's show him our support. Like I said, you can check the show notes for a link to learn more and to get to his Ko-Fi. All right, and this week on the episode, we've got our usual shout-outs, a look at new indie releases courtesy of Bookstack, a couple of Wandering Prompt stories, and a nice healthy set of power-up prompt mysteries to check out as well. And of course, stay tuned for a brand new Wandering Prompt later in the episode. Our writing discussion this week, as well, is going to be talking about when stories are finished. And after that, I'll be sitting down with author E.H. Lau to talk about his work, which combines fairy tales and retellings of various mythological stories. It's a fantastic interview, so look forward to that later in the episode. And that's it for housekeeping this week. Let's dive into the weekly shoutouts right after a quick word from this week's sponsor. Today's episode of the Saved as Draft podcast is sponsored by DraftLock. And done. Oh. Okay, I think this draft is good to go.
Would you like to lock this draft?
Yes, I think so. I've been through a few revisions, I sent it out to my editor, I've implemented beta reader feedback. Yes, it's good to go.
Confirmed. The draft is now locked. Please publish it at your earliest convenience.
Amazing. Wait, nope, actually, now that I think about it, maybe I could just polish up that one scene a bit more? You know what? I don't think it'll be a problem if I just open the doc back up for a second here.
Breach detected!
No! Wait! I was just kidding! Whew, that was a close one. Thanks, DraftLock! Having trouble deciding when your story is done? Try DraftLock, the new wearable for writers that ensures you won't touch your drafts once they're finished. DraftLock ensures your work gets published by delivering a helpful reminder of your promise to stop editing it in the form of 50,000 volts. So, next time you're worried editing might ruin your fun, trust DraftLock to get the job done. Alright, and we're back. In this segment, I'll talk about some stories submitted to Jennifer Jorgensen's ongoing event, The Unquiet World, before we dive into our other weekly shoutouts randomly selected from my subscriber chat thread. Remember, I open a podcast shoutout thread every Tuesday for people to share their links. Your stories have a chance to show up here or on Mina Howell's Penny Dreadfuls podcast, so it's always worth sharing your work. Okay, let's start with a couple Unquiet World stories. Remember, you can submit stories to this shared universe where spirits have returned from across history until the end of the year. Check the show notes for a link to learn more. Our first Unquiet World shoutout this week is The Quiet Occupants by Abhishek Banerjee. This story is described as a tale that unfolds through the flavors and moments of food and drink, inviting readers to taste echoes of the past alongside the present. This was a fantastic read. It's set during the early days of the Unquiet World, and it leans into the confusion and uncertainty really well. I really loved how this story changes perspectives as well between several characters before tying them together by the end in meaningful ways. A fantastic entry to this shared universe, and one that includes a lot of details that I've seen in other stories, which makes it feel right at home as part of this event. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. The light changed. He merged into evening traffic, weaving between cars whose drivers no longer flinched when he cut close. The city had taught him to move like water, finding gaps that shouldn't exist. Then he saw her. A woman stood in the center lane, her sari the color of old gold, the fabric draped in a style his grandmother might recognize from faded wedding photos. She didn't move as traffic flowed around her, not through her, but around, as if the cars instinctively knew to avoid that particular space. Her bangles caught the streetlight, cold and luminous. Arjun slowed. Other riders kept going. A taxi swerved left without honking. The woman turned her head, and he felt the weight of her gaze like a hand pressing against his chest. Not hostile, searching. Her lips moved, forming words the traffic noise swallowed whole. He accelerated past her, heart hammering against his ribs. The phone buzzed again, customer asking for extra chutney, please hurry. His hands were steady on the handlebars, but something in his sternum had gone cold, the way metal feels after hours in a freezer. By the time he reached the tower in Kolaba, his breathing had almost normalized. Almost. Excellent. Great work there. And for a second Unquiet World shoutout this week, we have Holiday Cheer by Suparna Chakraborty. This is a beautiful holiday-themed flash fiction piece for the Unquiet World, and my favorite part about it is the ambiguity regarding its main character. Is the narrator of the story themselves a spirit? I think either side could be a valid argument here. It's a short piece, but well worth your time. You'll be thinking about it long after you finish reading. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. From his place, Jimmy observed the neighbors across the street, returning home after a late night. He could hear scraps of their conversation. The man spoke loudly, in spite of the hour. "I don't care," the man said. "I know what I saw. You don't have to believe me. I heard it on the news. Other people said the same thing. Everywhere. They're seeing ghosts." "People say a lot of things, Dad. You can't believe it all." "You tell me what I saw." "Come inside, Dad." Still trying to make his point, the man entered the house, and the porch light turned off. Awesome. A really nice, short but powerful read there. And next, we'll look at our weekly shoutouts. We'll start with last week's runner-up for the Wandering Prompt. As I mentioned, I'll be picking 2 stories for that Wandering Prompt each week going forward. The first one that comes out will be featured in the next segment, but the runner-up will get a spot right here in the weekly shoutouts. So with all that being said, our Wandering Prompt runner-up story for last week is Wake Me Up Before You Go by Jennifer Jorgensen. Jennifer has been participating in the Wandering Prompt since I started them, and every time she posts, it's always just a few minutes after the winning story each week. And that was the case here as well. But as I mentioned, I've been getting feedback about making these Wandering Prompts more accessible to people in other time zones, which is totally fair. So, going forward, like I said, I'll do the winning story, and then I'll pick randomly a second story to include in the shoutouts. Jennifer's take on the prompt here is really cool. It jumps right into the concept with a story about people witnessing a man disappear when he falls asleep. They panic and start buying up coffee and tea and other things. One by one, they all fall asleep and are zapped from existence. Our protagonist's time comes soon as well, and I won't spoil how things end, but it's really, really cool and very unexpected. Here's a quick excerpt. We sat atop the trailers and laughed as we watched their staggering grow progressively worse the longer they stayed awake. We took bets on how long it would take them to hit the pavement. Then we saw it. one of the strangest of the screamers. We'd nicknamed him Sticky Pete because his beard was so matted he'd attach to a wall like Velcro if he got too close. Was stumbling down a back alley while we looked down from our perch. He lost his footing and fell against a building where he just stopped. The shouting didn't die out so much as it just cut off. Smitty mused that the dude might have died. Elsie wondered if the mist maids had somehow gotten past the walls and we'd missed seeing them in the fading light. I admit that gave us all momentary pause. But then Sticky Pete just vanished right in front of our eyes. He didn't fade out. There was no static. He didn't collapse or explode or pop. He just suddenly wasn't there. We all saw it, but we didn't all believe it. The fight started about who was pulling the prank and how it wasn't funny. I wasn't really listening to them at that point because I knew what I'd seen. Sticky Pete stood propped up against that wall just long enough for the sleep he'd been evading for days to finally catch him. He'd spent maybe 10 seconds asleep and then poofed out of existence. Amazing. Good stuff from Jennifer. Really cool interpretation of the prompter. Like I said, the ending is amazing. And now, for our standard weekly shoutouts. These are all stories randomly selected from my Tuesday subscriber chat thread, and as always, I picked 5 at random. So, this week, we're starting with Fracture 1, Scapula, Flight, by Loki Kohn. This is the opening fragment of a larger series called Soil of Bones. The author also invites us to think about the last time you almost left and stayed, or almost stayed but finally left as you read it, which I like. It's a really nice touch to kind of put that in the reader's mind. Some beautiful art here as well when we get into the piece, and honestly, if Lord Devereux were here, he would call this post a buffet of delicious delicacies, and honestly, I would agree. The piece is structured into poetic vignettes so that each bring forth vivid imagery and stunning word choice. Each section evokes different feelings, different emotions, but it all feels cohesive by the end. The style and this sort of quiet reverence of each piece really ties it together for me. It's like walking through an art museum of poetry, pausing to reflect on each display in this metaphorical gallery. It's a wonderful and meditative experience. Here's one of the poems from the collection in its entirety to give you an idea of what's in store. This one's called Helm and Horizon. Riding the changes strapped and straddled. The journey begun but never charted. Sunrise and set burn the same red flame. This heart beats loudest in headwind rain. Never have lips learned the sea's true taste, but hands still sing, still hoist, still chase. Tossed by the waves, the feet keep time. The song is over, yet they climb. Riding the changes again, unbroken. Bound to the wheel, the vow unspoken. New land waits beneath the moon. Amazing, amazing, amazing. Really good work. Definitely check this one out. Next up is Supernova and the Nomad, Fashionably Deadly by E.J. Ritter. The subtitle of this post offers us a preview as well, saying tragedy strikes 87 Gamma as Cheryl and Nova come face to face with the mighty Katzuk of Zionia. The infamous pirate will do anything to get his hands on their bounty. Sounds awesome, so let's dive in. This is episode 3 of an ongoing series, but I gotta say it's really fun to jump in and check out what EJ is doing here. Obviously, I'd recommend starting from the beginning, but one thing I'll say is that episode 3 throws you right into the action, which is awesome. The dialogue here is witty and sharp, which made me immediately attached to the characters. It feels like a high-stakes sci-fi adventure within just a few paragraphs, and that's thanks to the amazing pacing. EJ's style is fun, it's easy to read, and it's packed with personality. I had a lot of fun with this one, and I'll be checking out the full series for sure. Here's an excerpt I enjoyed. "Captain," the Nomad radioed. "My scans indicate a certain pirate lord has entered the system." Cheryl's stomach dropped. "Please tell me it's a different kind of pirate lord? Maybe the nice kind?" "Negative," the ship replied. "Designation, the mighty Katzuk of Zionia. Current trajectory, fast, loud, and extremely theatrical." Nova's tail puffed up like static discharge. "The one with the cape? Oh no, I hate capes." Grizzle blinked. "He's real? I thought that was just a cautionary tale the vending machines tell each other." The lights flickered, and the rig gave another violent shudder. Outside, a shadow passed across the viewport. Massive, clawed, and shimmering gold under the pale light of the nearest moon. "Yeah," Cheryl said, checking the charge on her blaster. "He's real." Amazing. Really nice little snippet there. Next up this week is Fragment from the Void, Haddle, by Connor Mancuso. The opening line here before you get into the story says this fragment takes us past deep and into the places where the ocean stops being water and becomes something taking notes. Connor always knows how to hook me in. For those unaware, Connor Mancuso is an absolutely superb cosmic horror author who tells stories in an epic poetry style. I interviewed him on last week's episode of the podcast, and I highly recommend giving that episode a listen if you haven't yet. Within the first few lines of this piece, though, I'm absolutely locked in. There's an early line that reads that depth isn't distance, it's pressure pretending to be God. It's a pretty short piece overall, but it makes a huge impact. Really nice word choice and powerful imagery to match. Here's an excerpt. The sub groaned like an old hymn. Bolts murmured. The hull remembered. It was once mountain, before someone convinced it to keep an ocean out. Instruments stopped agreeing, 5 kilometers down. The depth gauge said, impossible. Sonar said, no seafloor found. The clock said, time is a surface phenomenon. Only the camera believed in work. Its beam cut a wound of color into the dark, searching for geology, for old scars of tectonic grief. We found an eye instead. Oof, amazing. What about that last line, right? Check this one out for sure. You'll find links to all these in the show notes. Next up in our weekly shoutouts is The Water Thief Part 2 by Daniel Coates. And this one's actually a sequel to Daniel's power-up prompt story from last week, which is really cool. In this story, we again join our smuggler character from the dystopian prompt, and in this piece, we see him heading out and meeting up with a friend from his past. As the story continues, the stakes rise until it reaches a brutal final act that had my heart thundering in my chest. As I read that final line, I just stared at the screen. It's an incredible continuation, and I am now desperate for part 3. Here's an excerpt. A wide, toothy grin split Taka's face. You mean better than ever? Everyone likes a man with scars, especially the ladies. Vis's face was stony. Ha! Raiding geriatric wards for women, then? I suppose it's hard to scare them off with your personality if they forget you every time. Taka guffawed, deep in from his belly. Vis's visage cracked and he smiled slightly. Ha ha ha! It's good to see you again, old friend! Taka wiped a tear from his eye. Vis smiled more fully. You too, Taka. It's been decades. It has indeed, and we've both been busy. Vis's smile faded. So, why did you choose now of all times to break your promise? Taka's smile vanished and he had the decency to look ashamed, though it was clear he was unfamiliar with that emotion. You were the only one that knew where I went and why, so why? Taka came and sat down beside him. He leaned back and stared up, looking through time more than space. I have some news. Something you're not gonna like. Really good stuff. Check out that one from Daniel, especially if you enjoyed his power-up prompt story last week. Our final shout-out this week is Inside the Sun and Moon 1, Moonlit Queen by Hazel Allen. This one is from Hazel's collection of poems released in 2023. To celebrate the 2-year anniversary of this collection's publication, Hazel's posting each piece online for everyone to enjoy for a limited time. And with this piece, we get a beautiful sample of Hazel's iconic and ethereal style of poetry. It's introspective, but also celestial and magical. It strikes this emotional chord that I've only seen in Hazel's work, but it's one of the many reasons I'm a big fan of their poetry. It's just 4 stanzas, but I'll read the first 2 here. Check the post link in the show notes to read the full piece. Are you like the sun as it arises? Bright and warm, so full of splendor? Your beauty, so gallant, my prizes. To hold that heat, I'd be your contender. Are you confident like the moon at night? So mystifying, yet calm and serene? You're unafraid to give us your light. Confident and alluring, the moonlit queen. Beautiful, beautiful. Check out that one from Hazel. Thank you as always to everyone who shared links. Stay tuned for the next podcast shout-out thread coming this Tuesday for more chances to get featured on the show. Next up, we'll take a look at our Wandering Prompt winner. Welcome, one and all, to the 3rd Wandering Prompt Awards ceremony. Amazing that we've already done 3 of these. I need to try my hand at one, but I always hear the podcast super late. Well, they show up every week, and they've got 3 parts. Seems like you'd have plenty of time. That's a power-up prompt you're describing. Uh-huh. We're here to talk about wandering prompts. Hang on a second, there's a difference? Alright, you two, that's enough. This week, we're celebrating a story called The Quiet Hours by J.M. Gooding. J.M. got this published super fast after last week's episode. The prompt, of course, was to write a story set in a world where people disappear if they fall asleep. Now, this story was incredible for me. I love how it went past what happens when you fall asleep in this world. The result was something that was equal parts warm and comforting, but also existentially terrifying. I loved the ending too. It left an echo of fear inside me and a slight pang of regret as well. Well, I'll be honest with you, I fell asleep halfway through. Oh, really? Did you not like it? No! I wanted to go where they were going! That sounds like a sweet deal. Huh, it didn't work. Which is unfortunate for all of us. And what did you think of the story, other announcer? I gotta give you two names. Oh, me? I love the story's pacing. Oh, I agree. The story did a great job of setting up questions and then providing satisfying answers to them really quickly. It's a brisk but highly engaging read. Here's an excerpt. I'm not a hero in this. I was scared like everyone else. Scared enough I slept in 15-second bursts. Scared enough I slapped myself awake when my vision blurred. Scared enough to start calling my mother again even though she'd stopped asking. The thing nobody admitted out loud was this. Every missing person looked peaceful in the moments before they fell asleep. Hugh's wife said he'd smiled. The bus driver said Marnie looked like she was about to dream about something good. We weren't afraid of dying. We were afraid of enjoying it. Alright, and a huge congrats to J.M. Gooding again for winning this week's Wandering Prompt. His story was exceptional, so make sure you check it out at the link in the show notes. Next up, we'll take a look at this week's Indie Release Radar. Welcome back to our Indie Release Radar, powered by Bookstack. Arnold, you ready to check out some new stories that released this week from indie authors?
Yeah! Indie authors are my favorite!
I agree. Here are 3 recently released titles from indie authors that you can check out right now. First up, Tap Out is a new dark romance intended for readers 18 and over. It stars Bailey Sterling, a 28-year-old waitress stuck in a small town, forced to take care of her alcoholic father while her brother's deployed in the military. When mysterious men come knocking on her door to inform her of her brother's death, everything changes. In the wake of this devastating news, a 29-year-old Special Forces lieutenant named Draven Romanov steps in to keep a promise he made to her brother. Ready for something intense? Tap Out is also out now, so there's no waiting around for this one. What did you think, Arnold? Are you gonna tap out for this one?
No! I never tap out!
Uh-huh. Whatever you say. Next up, Sewing Spells, a field guide to becoming a wizard's apprentice, is the first book in the Wizard's Garden series. Syl was perfectly content as the manager of the village plant shop, that is, until they crossed paths with a wizard by the name of Wixen Anders Kessel. After watching the hopeless wizard kill every plant he purchases, Syl becomes determined to step in and thwart the disastrous Wixen's intentions. Together, the two will encounter a variety of magical creatures, spells, and obstacles as they grow from friends to companions and perhaps something more. Hey Arnold, how are you with plants? Do you have a green thumb?
No! My thumb is a normal color! If your thumb is green, you need to see a doctor! Now!
Yeah, you know what? Fair point. Maybe a wizard could help with that too. And third this week, I Dare You, a small town romance, is the 4th book in the Wilder series. Set in the town of Cala Bay, it stars a character who finds themselves back in their hometown after their life in New York City crumbled all around them. They soon cross paths with an old flame by the name of Sebastian Devereaux. Sebastian broke their heart once before, but despite this, they quickly find themselves falling into old habits and old feelings. Hey, wow, look, Devereaux, like Lord Devereaux. Hey, do you think Sebastian is related to him, Arnold?
No, the Devourer doesn't have family.
Except us, right?
He's not my daddy!
I never said he was. Anyway, thanks again to Bookstack and Hazel Allen as always for helping us get the word out about new titles from indie authors. You can find links to all of these in the show notes. And now, back to the show. Alright, and we're back. It's time for this week's Power Up Prompt Stories. This week was Mystery. Our setting was the ocean liner. Our characters could be either the armchair detective or the killer themselves. And the conflict, of course, was a killer on the loose with a locked room, murder mystery, and 3 days to solve it. Let's see what everyone came up with. First up is From Above to Below by Matthew, and this is a story for last week's dystopian prompt, and it's actually a level 1 story, which I haven't seen very often. I know the rules are technically that level 3 stories get shoutouts, but I also make the rules, so. This story uses the setting from last week's prompt to tell a rich sci-fi narrative with some really solid world building throughout. The writing style and voice is conversational as well, which I enjoyed. I felt like the protagonist was taking me on a tour of the city in the beginning and sharing what he knows, for example. The world building is also woven nicely into the exposition and dialogue, so it never feels out of place either. Shout out to that level 1 story from last week. And our first story for this week's mystery prompt is The Vowel in the Blood by Abhishek Banerjee. Right up top, the author says that with this story, they chose to blend psychological grief study with moral ambiguity by asking us not just who the killer is, but what do we owe the dead and what price do the living pay for choosing mercy over justice. I love that food for thought as we get started on the reading. Right off the bat, the writing style here is superb as well. It uses a first-person present tense, and the word choice beautifully reflects the time period of the piece as well. I love the way the dialogue is also written in italics. As the title suggests, there's a really fascinating narrative thread here about vowels being removed from names, but I of course won't spoil anything else. The mystery here is truly unique and gripping. The style and storytelling reminds me a lot of Agatha Christie, which is of course one of the greatest mystery writers ever, so I'd say our friend Abhishek here is indeed onto something. This is an incredible start to our Power Prompt Stories this week. Second this week, we've got Livingston's Final Victim by Suparna Chakraborty. This take on the prompt is a really nice 1920s style story that feels like a classic murder mystery. I love how the writing drops hints as you read, but lets you piece together things for yourself in the end. There's a note about midway through about asking the reader to decide on the murderer as a nod to old Encyclopedia Brown books. And while I do love that idea, we get some concrete answers here. Even so, Suparna may have inspired a new story idea for me with that note in this piece, so stay tuned for that. A fun and exceptionally written story, really enjoying the mystery so far. Let's go on to the next one. And third this week is The Tide Within by Luna Ashley Kolsu. It has been far too long since I talked about Luna's work on the podcast here, so I'm really excited for this one. Right off the bat, I was locked in with the concept, which is about an infamous killer boarding an ocean liner to hunt the last of the cult that made her, but a detective's also hot on her trail. It immediately brings in cosmic horror alongside the mystery. We learn early on that the killer has an accomplice named May. I love the way Luna weaves in backstory as we get into the story here as well. The mythology surrounding the serial killer and her past victims is really cool, and it helped pull me deeper into this world. The captain's list from the prompt is also used to excellent effect here as it adds a wrinkle for our killer, which again kept me hooked on every line as I kept reading. The killer in this story has 4 cultists to kill before the ship reaches its destination in 3 days, so Luna divides up the story as we get into it. Her amazing writing combined with the insanely cool premise and the solid structure makes this a phenomenal story on every level, and one of my favorites this week. Alright, next up we've got...
Wandering. Prompt 4. 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 5. Write a story or poem about a tea house that caters to lost and weary souls. 1,000 words or less. First to post a link in the comments wins. A second story will be chosen at random. Good luck.
Oh, sorry folks, had some interference there, but we're back to it. Next up is The Blackwater Rosary by Loki Cone. And with this piece, I immediately subscribed to this writer. Their poetry earlier in the show for the shoutouts was amazing, and this story just sealed the deal for me. What makes this one stand out is the writing style and word choice. It has an eloquent flow with lines that leap off the page. There was this one line that had my jaw on the floor. It reads, "The shot was softer than you'd imagine. The sea swallows everything." This is, of course, referring to a gunshot. The story is also told from the killer's POV, and I love that a few writers took that approach. In this case, the killer was fascinating. I loved the reverence they had for their work, for example. Really great story. Next up, we've got The Captain's Suspects by Felix Thornfell. This one's a period piece set in September of 1929 on a ship bound for the New World. I love the attention to detail with the setting and dialogue here. And another thing that I love about Felix's work is the author notes at the end, which always offer a deeper look into the thinking behind the piece. Here we learn Felix sought to explore what happens when well-meaning people mistake fear for guilt or charm for innocence. Another unique aspect of the story is how Felix used the armchair detective character. In this case, it was a journalist who gets swept up in everything. Once more, Felix explores the prompt with incredible detail and a unique angle this week, as he's done in prior weeks. I love reading his submissions for that reason. Highly recommend this one. Remember to find links to all of these in the show notes. Next up, we have Sunken Memories by Mina Howell. This is a poem from Mina, and much like her other poetry, it has absolutely pitch-perfect flow and rhythm. Not only that, but the piece also includes images that have their own stanzas as well. This means that while you're reading, you'll leave a written stanza and read the next one inside an image before jumping back into the writing, and this happens a few times. The added multimedia element here really increased the immersion for me. I felt like I was reading notes from the killer left solely for me. Thanks to writers like Mina here, I've discovered a newfound love of poetry this year, especially poems that can weave a compelling narrative like this one. So, incredible work, as always, from this insanely talented author. Next up is White Star, the Miura Detective Chapter 3, NG+, by Anton Anderson. This one's part of Anton's Tales of the Seekers collection, which are short stories set in the Seekers universe. One thing I loved about this one is how he took things in a sci-fi direction with a ship traveling through space. I've often referred to space as an ocean of stars, as many other writers have, so I love this take on the setting. I also really liked how Anton combined the characters in this story. Our protagonist is both an armchair detective and the killer in this story, which makes for a really fun read. He works right alongside one of his idols, a detective known as White Star, and watches as they put the pieces together. Now, why would they be helping the detective beyond the fact that they're a fan of them? Great question, but I'm not going to spoil anything else here. Check out this story for sure. It's a fantastic spin on this week's prompt. Great work from Anton. Next, we have The Gilded Abyss by L.G. Wells. LG's splitting this story into 2 parts as well because it won't fit into the 2.5k word limit, which is totally valid, and a great way to ensure you can still get a story submitted in time without limiting the scope of your idea. I never mind when people take that approach. In this piece, LG sought to try out a new writing voice that mimics the style of Conan Doyle and Agatha Christie. The voice comes through immediately in the opening paragraphs as well. I love the gruesome nature of the murder scene, but the way it's described with a verbal flourish is really, really nice. LG also establishes strong characters early on. I loved the combination of dialogue, body language, and physical descriptions to really sell us on the depth of the characters and the mysteries they're hiding. Perfect example is the Bishop of Essex, and how he's introduced with a combination of really nice imagery and a haunting glimpse at his true form. And yes, of course, LG, being a horror writer, takes things in a cosmic direction as the story goes on, something I'm always happy to see. Our protagonist here isn't the detective either. They are indeed a killer, but like all great stories, the truth here isn't so black and white. By the end of part 1, things reach a fever pitch, and we're left with a cliffhanger that has me dying for part 2. Check the show notes if you enjoy cosmic horror with your murder mystery, and check out the link. Next is The Lady in the List by Jennifer Jorgensen. Right off the bat, I love how this tosses in some humor that kind of taps on the fourth wall. Our detective character is excited to discover they've been asked to help solve a locked room murder mystery since they quote-unquote love a good challenge. I really like the attention to detail in this opening scene as well. We get to see the protagonist examine aspects of the murder scene, and Jennifer takes us through her thought processes as if she were a seasoned detective as well. It feels like the story's having a dialogue with the reader, with the detective asking questions, considering angles, and using all of this to make the reading experience more engrossing and immersive. You feel like you're on this ride with the detective as if she was Sherlock and you're Watson. And of course, in true Jennifer Jorgensen fashion, not everything is what it seems on the surface. I won't spoil anything, but if you've read Jennifer's work, then you know there's always more going on than what meets the eye. Another excellent story from this talented author. Love seeing her submissions each week. Next up is Unmoored by Tailspinner. This is the first time Tailspinner has joined us for one of the Power Up prompts, so be sure to give them a warm welcome by checking out their work at the link in the show notes. With this story, I love the somber tone they took with the narration and the attention to detail in the opening scene as we get a look at what's happened. Much like Jennifer's story, this piece gives us a deep dive into the detective's mindset and thought processes. It's an experienced character, which is clear, but the weight of things they've seen weighs heavy on their soul. This comes through beautifully in the writing, and I love the repetition of the phrase, "this cannot continue." Its meaning will become apparent as you read, but this is a really great first entry for a new author into the Power Up prompts. So thank you again to Tailspinner for this wonderful story. I hope to see more from you in the coming weeks and months. Next up is Chains of Conscience by Daniel Coates. This is another story where the POV is from the killer's perspective, but Daniel's approach here puts us in the mind of an inexperienced killer who's panicking about being caught, and that alone makes this really intriguing. Daniel keeps the tension high throughout the piece, especially once the detective shows up. There's a moment involving a handshake that had me on the edge of my seat. You'll see what I mean when you read it. It all leads to a thrilling conclusion with an ending that I really enjoyed. As usual, Daniel's work is incredibly well written and very engaging. Love this piece. All right, and our final Power Up Prompt story this week is 3 Days to Cherbourg by Connor Mancuso. And here's the pitch for the story, straight from Connor himself. On a transatlantic liner days away from port, the captain is found dead in a locked cabin. A list of names and an infamous serial killer's moniker laid out beside him. As panic ripples through the passengers, one of the suspects, the true other shore, quietly tends to a deeper obligation, feeding the vast, unseen thing that sings beneath the Atlantic and asking a shipboard armchair detective what he's willing to do with the truth. As usual with Connor's work, the cosmic horror elements here are felt straight from the beginning and continue to manifest in meaningful ways as the story goes on. Connor's style of epic poetry works really, really well here as always, but in this case, the lines are really short and it creates this frantic sort of pace as you're reading that feels like a rising heartbeat. And the dialogue here, it carries a lot of tension that works really well too. The mystery is immediately compelling, but you can also see the slow unraveling of the characters' minds as it goes on. As a fan of cosmic horror, I was really excited to see Connor and a few others add that element into this week's prompt. As I said, it was a very welcome addition to see. And thank you to everyone who submitted Power Up Prompt stories this week. The poll for next week is tied as of this recording, so we'll see if anyone comes in to break the tie. But otherwise, I'll flip a coin to decide next week's genre, so stay tuned for that Saturday morning, day after the podcast comes out. Next up is our weekly writing discussion right after a quick mindful moment. Hey there. This is Chill Bradley, here with this week's Mindful Moment. Here's a quote to consider. There are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is as though everything is a miracle. Albert Einstein. So many things had to go right for our universe to exist. And that extends to us as well. Statistically, from a probability perspective, no matter how you slice it, the fact that you're here and listening to this is a bona fide miracle. Usually when I think about my place in the universe, I feel very small. I think a lot of us do, but like most things, if you shift your perspective, you'll find that you're far more unique and special than you realize. Thanks for listening. Back to the show. All right, and we're back. This week's discussion is all about knowing when your story is finished. For some writers, a story is never done because it could always be improved. For others, it's a matter of process, and it needs a first draft, editing, and then it's ready. That's my approach, at least. Every Wednesday, I post these writing discussion topic questions in my subscriber chat, so let's see what other members of the community had to say about this week's writing discussion topic. First up, Mina Howell says, I just kind of go with my gut. If my fingers are no longer moving on their own accord, or the ideas aren't flowing and I don't think there's any more to say, it's either time for me to switch over to something else, or it's finished. It kind of depends on the idea I had for the story, though. Totally fair. I think for a lot of writers, it's a gut feeling, right? And it's kind of feeling out when that flow, when that kind of arc is coming to an end. And trusting your gut is a perfectly valid approach here. So great input there from Mina. Next up, Graham Brandham says, as someone who has just had to go back through the last 3 chapters of my published serial and make amendments, my answer is currently never. But if I was more in my normal frame of mind, I think you feel it. I have had a few moments in my writing and storytelling career where the stars aligned and it created a feeling that was almost the same level of excitement you might get from being in love. It just feels right. You get weirdly vibrant and start to vibrate perfectly in tune. It's a fun, strange feeling. It is, I imagine, a bit like the feeling when a composer hears an orchestra play their music for the first time and it brings out a tear. I really like that comparison and I wholeheartedly agree. There are definitely moments with certain projects that I've done over the years too where it's almost like you're, that kind of butterflies in your stomach sort of falling in love moment where everything just kind of lines up. So that's a beautiful comparison there. Thank you very much to Graham for that input. Next up, Mind of Matt says, it's more of a feeling than a specific marker. There's a shape to stories, and you get to know when a story is complete because you've filled out that shape. Maybe the shape isn't the one you had in mind when you started, but there comes a point where you can feel the end is coming. Plot threads are getting tied off, character arcs are coming to a close. Too much will just drag out the ending and lessen any impact you may have had. With my most recent, part of how I knew I was done was that I was itching for a new story. I'd been so focused on what I was working on for so long that I was ready to say goodbye to it and say hello to a new set of characters. If you mean finished as in done, no more edits, I think you'll always see something you might go back and change. A turn of phrase that doesn't hit quite right, or a different word that would have been used to provide more clarity. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, and you have to trust that what you've done is good enough. Really good input there from Mind of Matt. on both sides of it, right? The actual writing and then kind of the finished as and done part. They always say that perfect is the enemy of good. So I really like that last part. Is just where he says, recognizing that nothing's ever going to be perfect and trusting that what you've done is good enough. That's great advice right there. Thank you again to Matt for that. Next up, J.M. Gooding says, it's never done. I can revise 100 times and I will find something to add, cut, change, manipulate. But there comes a time when I have to say enough. Usually 3 or 4 revisions gets me to the place where I'm comfortable enough to say done. And yeah, once again, with a lot of writers, it just feels like there's always more you could change. And I've kind of, I guess for me, it's the sheer amount of stuff that I'm working on and kind of the pace that I work at. I've come to a point in my writing kind of journey where I can say, okay, this thing's done. And I, for time reasons and because I've already gone through my edits, I'm just going to put it out there. So it's different for everybody though, right? So with JM here, it's like 3 to 4 revisions and you're comfortable, as he says, comfortable enough to say done. I think that's fair. Next up, Jennifer Jorgensen says, I've got the analysis before that I don't always stick the landing on my stories. I sometimes just stop writing instead of fully closing things out. I'm working on fixing that and trying to be more mindful of ensuring I actually wrap things up. I think that happens because in my mind, it's done when my main character has achieved their catharsis. But sometimes there's actually more needed to really bring a sense of closure. That's a really fair point. I feel like Jennifer's stories that I've read have always kind of stuck the landing for me, but I also just struggle a lot personally with endings. Because it's like Jennifer said, like once the main characters kind of fulfilled their goal, it's like, well, what do we need to stick around for? But there are other things, right? You got to tie up loose ends. You need to have the story kind of, from a pacing standpoint, reach a natural conclusion. There's a lot of things to consider. So great input there from Jennifer. Next up, Gil Nobody says, I usually write what I want and tack on 1 to 3 sentences with some takeaways to be satisfying. Life doesn't give us neat endings. In that same vein, mine are usually very open. The weight of the character's experience is meant to be gnawed on after the reading is done. Really good point there, and I love the part about life not giving us neat endings. I think it's fair for stories to mimic that, absolutely. Even if they are fictional, not every ending is all tied up with a nice bow. So as Gil said, allowing the reader to kind of have something to think about after the story's done is really nice. I like that. Next up, Anton Anderson says, I usually have 2 rounds of beta reading for my novels, that is. The comments from the second round come, I polish the entire novel once again, and that's it. Time to start writing the sequel, prequel / spinoff. Luckily, so far, I was never really tempted to do a 3rd round, or maybe my desire to continue the story was always strong enough to push me further. Yeah, it's a good point there. Having a set process, like I said, that's my approach, is a great way to do it. And then obviously, like if you're getting excited about the next book, then, jump into that. Especially if you've kind of, as Anton said here, gone through the beta reading and all the other necessary, kind of preparations. Makes sense. Next up, J. Allen Winchester says, well, I would like to preface this comment by saying I'm plotter by nature, so I put a lot of development time in before I write the actual first draft. I take into account the overarching story. Where does the story begin, go, and end? I suppose my world building is the clockwork that allows me to write within the boundaries I created. In the same vein, it also guides me to a point where I know it is finished. I'll use one of my current series I'm publishing, Nature Calls. I came up with these characters that were trying to meet each other, so I needed to know what was standing in their way. These created the stakes of the series, and those stakes led to conflicts between the characters and their motives. Once I organized the timeline of how these conflicts occurred, I found a pattern that felt like the progression of the seasons, which is how I named each book. Each season reflected in the conflict within that particular book, and each book was a progression through the overall plot of the series. It only made sense that winter would be the end, so I outlined all 4 books and started chapter summaries on spring. Once I've summarized all the events, I break them down into chapters within the limits I set for myself. I try to keep NC to 20 chapters per book. With the summaries done, I start to write, and each chapter must be finished before I start the next to allow the characters to play in the sandbox. This is where I get the surprises and nuggets of wisdom I didn't expect, and I don't really have a timestamp on my progress. It's one of the reasons I relied on feedback from readers on Inkitt to gauge how I polished my draft. Once I finish the last chapter, I go through the whole manuscript to look for clarity and consistency. Once I have that ironed out, I stop because it's finished for me. I try to get beta readers to share their perspectives if I didn't get a ton of feedback along the way, but I feel the book's journey has come to an end. Thank you to Jaden for that really in-depth feedback there and insight. I really like the process that he outlined there. And I agree, if you're a plotter, that kind of gives you sort of an edge in this case because you have an outline, you know how it ends. And, I myself, even with an outline, try to leave some space for, inspiration, which it sounds like Jaden does as well with that sandbox comment earlier there. But yeah, no, this is a great flow here. For anybody listening, if you want to check out Jaden's reply in the chat thread there, I would highly recommend following it yourself as well, because this is really good for writers that have kind of more of that plotter kind of approach. Next up, Daniel Coates says, I'm in the same boat as Jimmy and a couple other people. It's never quite done. I find a point where it's good enough and do my best to make peace with pressing publish. For this reason, I have to constantly remind myself that it was the best I could do at the time if I ever revisit past work. Forgiving yourself is hard though, especially with art. Yeah, Daniel brings up a really good point there. I will oftentimes look back at my old stuff and kind of, as they say, cringe at it. But in general, I'm pretty proud of all my work on Substack, and I think it's because, again, with having done this for many, many years now, professionally and creatively, I've kind of gotten to the point where I make peace with the fact that that was the best story I could tell at that point in time. And the same goes with the poems. I kind of just, focus on moving forward, getting better. When it comes to something like The Order of the Pawn, for example, that I'm working on, I feel a lot of pressure to deliver, a really top-tier Devine story every time with that. But something that I plan to do there is go back and revise it and expand or, edit later on to then publish books. So in that case, I'm kind of saying, okay, this is a first draft. It's good enough. It's a good reading experience. It's got narration. I'll put it out and I'll come back to it later. So that's an example of how I kind of approach it. But again, Daniel brings up some good points there. All right, next up, Taylor V says, for me, I would say that my stories are never quite done. When I was in college, my stories usually went through 1 or 2 edits before I was satisfied with it. But there are times it takes a lot more than that, like my nonfiction piece about my adoption. I have spent many years on it and it has gone through so many phases. Once I can figure out the best way to sequence the events that make me happy and makes the story flow, then I can finally start the last leg of the marathon. Really, really good point from Taylor there. I think our processes change as we get older and we get more experience. But then you have to take into account here, like Taylor said, the nonfiction piece, which is something that in this case is very personal to Taylor. And so as a result of that, I think it takes on a bit more of like pressure, where you're really trying to get it as best as it can be because it's your story and that makes it really close to you. So really good point from Taylor there. And again, totally valid way to approach it. You just have to kind of, develop the process that works for you. Next up, Mac Sitko says, it's never done. There's a point when we've beaten ourselves so hard we just can't take it anymore, and we just say F it and press submit. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of a very nice boiled down one-shot explanation of that kind of process that a lot of writers go through. So Mac makes a good point there. And last but not least, the Autumn Star says, depends on the definition of done. The story is done when I feel that wonderful lightness in my chest. The story no longer sitting on my heart. The work is done when it's either accepted by an editor or self-published on Amazon. Yeah, I mean, having those milestones to kind of decide when and how you'll call a story done makes sense. And then I love that little bit about it not sitting on your heart anymore, because I think for a lot of us, stories kind of, they simmer inside of us and then they make their way out into the world. And when that feeling passes, like you've done the story justice, then it's done. So I like that. Really nice way to cap this off. Thank you to the Autumn Star. All right, and next up, it's time for our featured guest interview. This week, I'm sitting down with an experienced writer who weaves together stories inspired by classic fairy tales and mythology. He's also someone who has a lot of wisdom to share as part of his article series detailing aspects of his own creative journey. Let's dive right in. All right, everyone. This week, I'm very excited to welcome to the Saved as Draft podcast a writer who takes a slow and considered path when it comes to his work, nurturing his stories before they hatch. Please welcome to the show, E.H. Lau. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Bradley. Glad to be here on the Saved as Draft podcast. Hopefully we can get this one out of the drafts and published. And feel free to call me Edward.
Okay, Edward it is. Awesome. No, I love that. This one will absolutely make it to the to the world. So let's start off by having you tell us just a little bit about yourself, Edward, and your creative journey thus far.
Well, I mean, you basically said it. I like to take my time when it comes to writing. Like when I write a story, I like to think on it, take the time to refine it over and over until I think I've done the best that I could do at the time. Of course, I don't always succeed, but, that's what I'm always aiming for, well thought out stories and articles, which unfortunately means I can't really do prompts or things like that. So sorry about that, Bradley.
No problem. I understand. Okay. Yeah, no, that's interesting though. Yeah. I think a lot of writers, kind of have, obviously their own approach to that sort of thing, but it really is interesting to think about, they always say perfect is the enemy of good, right? But we as writers obviously want to put out the best thing possible. So, as someone who kind of takes a bit of a slower approach like you do, I'm curious, like, how do you kind of get to that point with an article or a story? How do you get to that point where you're like, you know what, this is good. Like, I'm ready to put this out in the world. Is there like a certain kind of threshold that you go for, or like what's that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's not it's almost a gut feeling, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, my process is usually that I have like an outline,
Hmm.
Usually the story that I want to tell, what the beginning, middle, end are, and then I keep going over, the characters, the plot, what they do, etc., and over again until I feel well, I can't call it perfect, right? But until I feel satisfied. But and that kind of varies depending on the story.
No, for sure. I think a gut feeling is a fair way of describing it, and that's honestly how I sort of go, through the process of like draft to publication. Is it's like obviously I'm looking for the basics, structure, flow, pacing, punctuation, editing, all that kind of stuff. But art by its very nature shouldn't be perfect, right? Like it should be, not necessarily flawed, but just human, right? And yeah, and it's tough because as writers we want it to be perfect, like just that human need to like make things perfect. It's
Yeah,
tough. It's tough.
I think for me though, the important thing is that once I have the story that I want to tell, like for example, uh Mulan story that I wrote, that was inspired by Mulan, right? I mean, the base core of it was to have Red Riding Hood meet Mulan, and then they go and search for a Shandan, which is a kind of it's the Chinese alchemaic equivalent of the elixir of immortality.
Okay.
Now the plan was always to have them fail, uh, and but the reason why they fail is because such a thing doesn't exist. But Mulan is looking for it because her emperor told her to do so, so that he could, be immortal, right?
Right.
So after getting that plot set up, I would then have to figure out, what actually do I want to put in there? Because there are many like things that I could put in there, not put in there. So like one of the things was should there be a whole thing where Red and Mulan actually, go and fight bandits or whatever, right? Because a core of the story is that Red can summon is a knight and can summon, magic wolves to her side. And Mulan, of course, is a soldier.
Hmm.
But as I'm writing it, right, I realize that that's not important to the story, right? So that gets cut out, and it's shortened to a montage, or it's just mentioned as a throwaway line. This happened, and now we're the best of friends.
Right. That makes sense though. I like how you describe that because it's one of those things where I feel like, especially with more complex stories, you as a writer, you kind of have to take that time to get to know the characters and the story so that you can best understand what's most important and what needs to be a part of it. And I feel like that isn't something you can necessarily rush, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like there's a whole bunch of things that just ends up on the well, I guess in movie terms they would call it the cutting room floor.
Right.
A whole bunch of additional scenes that were, gonna be there that just gets cut out because, it doesn't matter.
No, I think that's an excellent comparison. Yeah. And I just love that you kind of put that forward as part of like your overall kind of publication and brand. You're like, hey, listen, I'm not going to be someone who's posting stuff all the time, but that's because, what I'm doing requires this kind of methodical approach. And having read some of your work, I mean, I think it absolutely pays off, right?
Oh,
So
thank you. I'm glad to hear that.
yeah, no, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about some more specifics of your work as we go on here. But in general, that my impression has been very positive so far, which is why I'm excited to have you on the show here so people can hear about it. My next question here for you, I was going to ask, at what point in your life did you decide to become a writer? And do you remember the first story that you wrote by any chance?
Unfortunately, I'm old enough to say no to both of those.
Fair.
No, I mean, I vaguely remember kind of striking an interest one day in class. Like, it must have been maybe in like primary school or something. And I guess one of the teachers just got us to like write a creative story or whatever. And then I guess, from that moment on, it kind of was like a thing that kind of awoke that I wanted to, you know, try at, over and over during multiple times in my life. So, but yeah, I can't remember the specifics.
For sure, that's totally fine. I always ask that because it's interesting because my kind of personal aha moment was also in primary school. For me, it was second grade, and it was very similar to what you said. The teacher gave us a creative writing assignment, and it was for this contest, and I took home third place myself, which was nothing to like write home about. But that was the moment that I remember being like, you know what, I need to do this, like, and do it a lot.
Whoa. Okay, that's kind of interesting to hear someone else kind of had a similar spark in their childhood.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously had a lot of guests on the show, and everybody has sort of a different answer to it. So I want to say that you're the only one, if and maybe I'm forgetting like one other person, but it's very rare that I hear a very similar story to mine. So that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure.
So, in terms of your overall writing style, how would you kind of describe it to someone who hasn't necessarily read your work yet? And more specifically, what themes or concepts do you tend to focus on? I know you mentioned sort of like, connections to sort of mythology and stuff like that. So, I'd love to hear about that as well.
Well, I mean, I've been writing for over like 2 decades now. So it's kind of so the style has changed, of course. I remember vaguely kind of doing more third person stuff when I first started out because that's how a lot of books are. But I think later on, and my current style is usually more like first person point of view is what I tend to go for, and that's because I really enjoy the interiority that it affords me, being able to go into the narrator's thoughts and emotions, being able to immerse the reader into that character, that narrator's journey. And I guess that was influenced by Sherlock Holmes and Animorphs. I don't know if you've ever heard of that series.
I loved Animorphs. Man, I haven't heard that name in a long time.
Yeah. I loved how they use the first person to sort of like Dr. Watson, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's the one describing Holmes's deductive superpowers. So that it affords a certain sort. You kind of think, you get into his thoughts about, wow, Holmes is awesome, but also it kind of helps keep the mystery as well as to how Holmes is doing it until Holmes explains it.
Right. No, I love that perspective. Yeah, I've always gravitated towards first person myself. I obviously like these days we'll mix it up between different POVs, but you're absolutely right about first person, and I love that example from Sherlock Holmes. Right, it's like it preserves the mystery because it's from Watson's perspective. Right, it's intentionally more limited than as if we were in Holmes's head, which would be probably pure chaos. Right.
Yeah. It also helps me because I tend to not actually really enjoy world building as much. So if I limit it to, the character's thoughts and emotions at that time, then I don't really have to tell the reader, what's happening like 6 continents over.
That's a really good point. Yeah, because world building is one of those things where a lot of writers struggle with it. And yeah, exactly. I often say that when you are world building, it's important to focus on what the characters and that scene, what they would care about, right? It's like you said, something happening 6 continents over doesn't matter, right? But you are kind of pulled into telling that story if you zoom out too far. So having sort of the more personal perspective makes sense. That's really, really good. I like that.
Of course it helps, I think, I think you mentioned it before mixing it up. So in some of my prologues or interludes or whatever, it will be a third person perspective just to, give some more context as to what's going on. So, it's good to have tools in your tool bag, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah. So, yeah, this actually goes nicely to my next question, which is I wanted to ask kind of where you tend to get inspired from. So, like for me, obviously, I watch a lot of movies, TV, and I'm a huge gamer, so that's where a lot of my inspiration comes from. Um, but I'm curious, whenever you're trying to kind of get inspired for something new, where do you typically go?
Uh, Honestly, I know this is kind of one of those vague answers, but at this point in my life, I guess I kind of just say everything.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because life, other stories, all kind of builds up on each other in a person's experience, right?
Hmm.
And you kind of just pull from that, to tell a story. Like I think in Mirrors of the Snow Queen, um, which is where Red Riding Hood goes faces off against the Snow Queen. So if anyone's listening and is interested in that, you should check that one out. But so at the time, I had just had a surgery. It was a minor surgery, but I remember like when I woke up from the surgery, there was a fairly sharp abdominal pain. I was like shivering uncontrollably. I felt very blurry and all that, and that I took and put into a scene where Red actually gets stabbed by one of the Snow Queen's magic icicles, and that led to a scene where she could reconcile with her mentor because her mentor was the one that had to rescue her and take care of her as she recovered. So just I mean, that was a very specific example, but I'm just saying, like, to answer your question, it's good to just kind of keep an open mind as to where you can draw your inspirations from.
I really like that, and I've heard some similar responses from other guests on the show. The example though that you gave was perfect. Yeah, it's like kind of just remaining open to life and your lived experiences informing stuff in your stories. Like that example was perfect.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, if the great Bard himself, pulled so much from history, I think we can pull from anything.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. Fantastic answer. Yeah. Okay, so you mentioned a few times now that you've been writing for, I think you said about 20 years now. So my next question, I'm curious, is what brought you to Substack and how long have you been here exactly?
Oh, probably like 5-ish years, if my memory serves correct.
Hmm.
I think at the time I was kind of just because I had a WordPress blog back in the day, but I
Okay.
found it to be very unwieldy to use.
Hmm.
Um, and then I started my own website, but that was also kind of unwieldy to update, unless if you wanted to pay for something. And as a as a developer, so my day job is a software developer.
Okay.
So I did not want to do that because there was a little bit of pride.
Sure. Yeah, that's fair.
But so then because it was its own website, it's kind of hard to get exposure, right?
Yeah.
Because you're not on one of the major platforms or whatever. So when Substack first started, I was like, oh, it's a cool new newsletter thing that's not MailChimp. Maybe I'll give it a try. So here we are. And I kind of
Interesting.
just kept at it, I guess, over the half a decade I've been on here.
Wow,
Although
that's
I haven't
interesting.
been able to build up much of an audience, but here we are. That's why we're doing this interview.
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, kind of putting yourself out there, coming on to podcasts like this one. I mean, that's a great way for more people to discover your work. So yeah, really, really happy that we met. I'm honestly curious since you've been on Substack for so long. How did you come across me specifically in like the writer's journey? I'm wondering like how we crossed
Oh,
paths.
I did actually want to say this. So little shout out to Hazel. I think it was thanks to their endorsement that I, felt comfortable enough reaching out to you.
Oh, okay, Hazel. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, yeah. Hazel
Yeah.
and I became friends earlier this year after I joined Substack. Fantastic poet,
Yeah, I
writer,
think
and
I
human
came
being.
across one of their poems or something and,
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
connected
Okay.
a bit. So yeah.
Well, I'll have to thank Hazel for that because I'm really glad that you and I met.
Yeah, well, if they're listening, thank you.
Hazel's a pretty dedicated listener of the podcast, so I wouldn't be surprised if they heard this. That's fantastic. Okay, cool. So yeah, your goal with Substack then obviously is to kind of obviously grow your audience, reach more readers. Is there anything else that you're kind of like, like a major goal of yours, like here on Substack specifically, or is it really just kind of, raising awareness about your work?
Yeah, mostly the raising awareness part. You can tell I don't have a good game plan.
Yeah, I mean,
I take my time with the writing, but I don't take the time for the marketing and expose all that.
for sure. That's really hard to do. I myself have had I've had the benefit of working in marketing now for over nearly a decade. And having that experience, I think, gave me a bit of a like kind of head start when it came to marketing my own work and creatively. But I cannot imagine without all the experience that I've had trying to just jump into that.
Yeah, for sure. You're gonna maybe someone should interview you one day about that. That does sound pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, no, that would actually be a great topic for an interview. I've been on a few podcasts. I think in a couple of weeks here, there's an interview coming out. I'm not sure. I don't think we went too deep into marketing, but that would be a good topic for an interview. But yeah, so my next question here, I'd like to dive a bit into the specifics of your publication. So one thing that I want to talk about first here is that you have a series inspired by classic fairy tales like Snow White and Little Red Riding Hood. You had mentioned, I think, a little bit about that earlier, one of the examples that you gave us. But how did that concept get started? What led you to sort of take on that task of kind of retelling sort of classic fairy tales, but like with a modern spin? Because like the example that I read the first one earlier with Red, and it was a mashup with Jack and the Beanstalk with the magic beans, and I love how effortlessly you brought those two together. So yeah, again, I'm just curious, like what led you to kind of start that entire series that you've been working on?
That's actually a complicated backstory, but so well, you mentioned being a gamer, so I guess so. One of the games that I like is a Japanese series called Super Robot Wars.
Okay.
That's where they mash up a ton of mecha anime like Gundam, Mazinger, Gal Gaga. I don't know if any of these names will resonate with anybody listening.
You never know.
Yeah, but to my fellow mecha anime fans, that one's for you. Anyways, so when I was younger, right, I kind of did want to make a sort of game like that, and I was like, I could mash up some fairy tales together. That didn't come to be, but then I started a different series called Retelling Myths. I think during the early days of the pandemic, 5 years ago. And so, I was picking, stories and, legends and stuff to retell. And then I remembered that I had this idea. So I was like, maybe I could bring that back, So so it kind of started as just this video gamey idea of a crossover, and kind of just became, one world where I looked at like a bunch of different well, it started with mostly European fairy tales, but as you can tell with the Mulan and the newer one, it branched out to like Chinese and Japanese ones as well. And then I have one coming up that's taking inspiration from the 1001 Nights stuff.
Interesting. I love that you're branching out to other kind of genres and sort of like regions of storytelling and fairy tales. That's fantastic. Yeah, the Mulan one was super interesting to me, just conceptually. I thought that was really fascinating. I haven't really seen that kind of mashup before, so I love that you're kind of carving out your own niche here when it comes to this. It's really
that
cool.
was serendipity. Sorry if I interrupted you there.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that was serendipity because when I was doing the Retelling Myths one, I wanted to include more Chinese mythology and folklore and stuff, having grown up in Hong Kong, there was a whole bunch of stories and stuff that I liked and, wanted to retell, but I could never Well, one of the things that I wanted to do with the Retelling Myth series was not just to simply retell a story,
Right.
because you got like Wikipedia articles and encyclopedias and just like many retellings over the many years doing that. So I wanted to do my own take on it. That's not to say that those aren't good. In fact, I think they're very vital to the continued survival of the stories. I just meant I didn't want to do that myself. But
Yeah.
anyways, so then I couldn't figure out how to do all those stories. But then one day I was in the public library, so shout out to public libraries. And I came across a children's book that somebody had donated to the library from Hong Kong of all places.
Wow.
That was a retelling of the Mulan story, right? So I was looking for inspiration at the time, so I picked it up, flipped through it, and I noticed that there was a reference to a Khan. Now, to explain, the Chinese emperors were usually called emperors and not Khans, except during the times when the Mongols were the ruling dynasties of China. So that led me to look up, why that children's book would have a reference to Mulan serving a Khan, which led me to find that the original Ballad of Mulan was actually written during, I believe it was the Northern Wei dynasty or something like that. But anyways, it was the time when the Khans or some of the Mongols were in power. And if anybody out there who knows Chinese and Mongolian history better than me, feel free to correct that. But the original ballad itself, I found so engrossing that I knew I needed to, make a story out of it.
Interesting. Yeah. That series of events is wild, especially the book at the public library being from Hong Kong. Yeah, very, very
I know it's
yeah.
Sometimes life just throws you like, don't look a gift horse in the mouth or whatever, they say.
Yeah, it's serendipitous is a great way of describing it. That's crazy. That's a really interesting story. So, yeah, to kind of draw a distinction here. So you have obviously a section of your publication that's like retelling myths, which we covered a bit of that just now, and then kind of part of that, but also separate from that, if I understand correctly, is your Red Riding Hood kind of series that you've been doing.
Yes, the Red Riding Hood saga. That one spun out of retelling myths, I guess you can say, into something a bit bigger.
Gotcha.
Because
Yeah.
all the retelling myths are like kind of not really connected. Whereas I did like a trilogy in retelling myths of the Red Riding Hood saga, and I thought that was gonna be it, but then I started having more ideas about what Red could do, and then so that series grew and became its own thing.
That's fantastic. So with that series specifically, then, how many stories have you done there? And if I understand, it's still ongoing, right? You have plans for future stories?
Yes. So there was the original trilogy, and then depending on how you count it, there's because some of the stories are split into different parts. So I'm gonna give you a random count, and we're gonna say that's how many there are.
Totally fine.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 9 so far, and then I'm planning 2.5 more. The half is an epilogue to wrap everything up.
Wow, interesting. Okay. Now, do you plan to compile all those together into like a either self-published or potentially traditionally published book, or is there any plans there for that?
Yeah, hopefully after I get it done, I'll probably do the. I think indie publishing is the in vogue word now for self-publishing, so I'll try and give that a go.
That's right. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I've seen a lot of success, especially on Substack. I've come across and purchased a lot of books from authors that I met on Substack, and I love.
Yeah, same here. Same here.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I think that is.
I am looking forward to when you put your Devine stuff into a book.
Oh,
and then I
yes,
can
thank
grab a
you.
copy of that.
Yeah, I honestly have been thinking about that more and more as time has gone on. Devine always started out as sort of like a passion project of mine. I always joke that I never really considered myself a fantasy author. I really thought that my strengths lied in like, horror and maybe sci-fi. But yeah, seeing the success of Devine and seeing how that's evolved and, like fans like yourself, enjoying those stories. Yeah, I think a book is in order to collect everything, especially with the Order of the Pawn series.
Oh,
Uh,
I don't spoil that for me. I have not gotten there yet.
don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. I won't. I would never do that to to a Devine fan.
Thank you, thank you. You asked me earlier if there were any themes in my writing,
hmm
and I never really answered that because we went on a super long segue somewhere. Uh, with the Red Riding Hood saga in particular, especially after the original trilogy, I think one of the themes is hope and persistence.
Mm,
So
yeah.
I don't know how much you've read, but at the end of the original trilogy, Red basically has to start a quest to find a cure for a poison that curses her beloved
Mm,
Sleeping Beauty, let's just say,
hmm
to not spoil it too much for people who haven't read it yet. And so the all the stories afterwards are basically her on this quest, meeting different people. And like I mentioned with the Mulan story, right? That's why she's looking for the Shandon, because she thinks it might help cure her beloved, right?
mm-hmm.
But she will fail in every single one of the stories.
Mm,
But it's and they're all written like that because the point isn't what's the cure, right? The point is hope and persistence, you know, and the emotional ups and downs that come with pursuing a difficult goal.
mm, hmm
So
Yeah.
so she so that is one of the themes, I guess, of the later saga.
No, I love that. I appreciate you adding in that context there. I think it's incredible how that theme exists across the series. Like you said, it's like in every chapter she'll fail, but the point is not that she failed. The point is that she's persisting, right? And
All
and
right,
push.
now here's where I pull back the curtain to tell you that I actually came up with that just a few days ago when you asked me if there were any themes in my writing. It was honestly, I thought about it and I was like, you know what? That is unconsciously a theme that I put in there.
It's interesting how we as writers don't even realize. I think that's kind of the magic of creativity is that oftentimes, I mean, this happened to me too. It's like you look back on something without even realizing it. You've done something like that, right? Subconsciously.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is like you said, it's magic sometimes.
Yeah, no, it really is. I love that. And I appreciate the context there. That's fantastic. So, something I wanted to also mention and talk about a little bit here is separately from your kind of, retelling myths stories as well as the Red series, you also have a series of articles called Falcon Talks where you explore your creative journey. And you've actually marked a few of them as kind of your personal favorites. So, it's kind of a two-part question. What kind of inspired you to sort of to do that, Falcon Talk series? And what is it about those, quote unquote personal favorites of yours that makes them kind of stand out to you as well?
Honestly, it's probably just because I've lived on long enough to have really random things to say that I want to write down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, like some things that I think might help people, and so I just write it down as much as it is an outlet as it is to just be like, hey, maybe you're interested in this. Um, like I have a few there about why I write the way I write, but then there are others that are just oh, I really like Dragon Ball. Which was a little bit the mangaka for Dragon Ball died, I think, a year ago, so that was kind of a tribute to that, to something that had been a huge influence and favorite in my life. So but
hmm
the two favorites that you're talking about, though, so the first one is actually, so those two are personal favorites because that's kind of where I kind of went, all out, I guess, in
mm
terms of trying to put something that I think people should read and consider and contemplate on, rather than just, hey, I had fun playing Journey
hmm
10 years after 10 years after it was released. Um, So the first one is about Zeta Gundam. Shout out again to Beck anime fans. And the second one is about Spider-Man. So the Zeta Gundam one is I guess kind of a meditation on growing old and what that means in regards to our duty as people who are older to those that come after us. And the Spider-Man one is a meditation on power and responsibility. So I'll just briefly explain it so that I'm not blowing our interview time over. So in the Spider-Man one, you know the famous saying, right? With great power comes great responsibility.
Yes, yeah.
So that's not actually the original line.
Hmm.
The original line is with great power there must also come great responsibility.
Oh, wow.
And there must also come is actually kind of important because it implies or it's a little bit more explicit that with great power a person must also choose to be responsible with that power. It doesn't the responsibility isn't a natural thing if I'm making sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, hearing the original line, it really does change the context of the statement, I think.
Yeah. So the article is kind of a reminder, I guess, in two ways. Like so it's a reminder that if you find yourself with power, you should choose to use that responsibility.
Right.
And it is also a reminder that there are those with power who will choose to use that power irresponsibly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it really is. It's like you said, it's not having power doesn't mean that you automatically accept the responsibility. It's a conscious choice that you have to make.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting. I love the Falcon Talks kind of series of articles that you have in general too, because it's one of those things where I'm kind of thinking about myself here a bit, but like I do also sort of articles about kind of self-reflection, the art of writing, and just things that I've learned over the years, right? And I never sit back and say to myself, "Yeah, I'm an expert. Like people need to hear me talk about this random stuff." You know what I mean? But more often than not, people do get a lot of value out of it, and I think it's really.
Mhm.
I think it's really interesting how you also, through your experience, you're able to like kind of, do these articles and stuff and convey a wisdom that you may not even realize you have, but it's there. Like it's 100% there. Just listening to you talk right now, like this is really interesting stuff. And I feel like more writers should take that advice and
Yeah,
and kind of, wax poetic from time to time, if you will.
yeah, I think though it's important to I kind of go over this in the Zeta article as well. Like we do need to remember though that just because we're older and have more experience, that doesn't mean we're automatically correct.
Right.
We need to also be able to listen to people who come after us and the people who and be able to teach them, right? Guide them.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm not gonna say that my expertise as a writer is that great seeing my current status, but I just mean like also like if you're, for example, a manager at your job, or you're leading a team, or you have kids, or younger siblings or whatever, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. This conversation is so enlightening. I'm really excited that you're going to be on the show because I feel like it's very clear that like from having read some of your work and from talking to you that you have a lot to say, like anyone, right? But my hope with these interviews and with the podcast is to really get people's voices out there so that you can find your audience, because I 1000% believe that people would love your stuff. We just got to get their eyes on it. You know what I mean?
Well, thank you for saying that. That is nice to hear.
Yeah, no, it's a huge motivation for why I do these interviews. So I love that you are kind of sharing your own wisdom and kind of experience. And it's like you said, having more experience doesn't necessarily make you correct or better than anybody else, but I think it is important to convey what you've learned, right? The lessons you've learned,
Yeah.
especially for the writers.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
It's good to exchange experiences and perspectives.
Yes, absolutely. Wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, so that brings me to my next question here, which is looking ahead to the coming year here, 2026. Obviously, you mentioned you've got a few more of the Red Riding Hood stories in the pipeline. Is there any other kind of big projects that you'd like listeners to know about going into the new year? Any big goals that you have?
Well, yeah, the 2.5 stories that I mentioned for the
Mm-hmm.
Red Riding Hood saga, which would be one based around Scheherazade, who's of course the narrator, well, the storyteller of A Thousand One Nights.
Right.
And one that I'm thinking would be around The Little Mermaid. So those would be the two. That Little Mermaid one was just random. Speaking of random inspirations in life, I was listening to a folklorist on Wired. You know, Wired sometimes do those interviews with
Sure. Yeah.
experts on random things.
Yeah.
And then she brought up how in the original Hans Christian Andersen story, right? Uh, Mermaids don't have a soul, and how the mermaid made a deal with the witch to, if she could make a prince fall in love with her, that the mermaid would gain a soul, but the mermaid was unsuccessful, so she was going to die, without a soul. But then her sisters made a deal that if the mermaid, now human, sorry,
Right.
killed the prince, that she could become a mermaid again and then live at least for like another 200-300 years. But then the mermaid chooses not to, and basically sacrifices herself for her love. And I just thought there was something in there that maybe I could use for the series.
Yeah, no, that concept is incredible. It's amazing how when you go back to the original source material, how you can find like completely different sort of perspectives. It just changes the whole context of the story.
Oh
It's
yeah,
amazing.
Anderson was very this is not supposed to be an insult, but he was very Christian.
Sure, sure, yeah.
So the concept of a soul and what it means to have one, I think, was on his mind when he wrote the story. At least that's my interpretation of it.
No, it sounds like it. It sounds like it. But like I said, it adds a lot of weight to the sacrifice there at the end,
Yeah, for sure.
knowing that those are the stakes.
Yeah.
That's fan.
There is a happy ending though. So the Little Mermaid then becomes a wind spirit, and through good deeds she can earn a soul.
Okay, got it, got it, got it. Yeah, I'm really interested to see where you take that because, like I said, having read a little bit of that of the Red Riding Hood series, yeah, I'm very intrigued.
Yeah, I'll just spoil it a little bit so that people aren't disappointed, but I probably will not involve the soul that way because I just don't want to have it that clear as to what a soul is in my world. Let's put it that way.
That makes sense. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense because putting too much detail into that, it kind of, from a world building standpoint, it kind of locks you in,
Yeah,
boxes you in.
exactly.
So that makes
Exactly.
sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that though. Love the concept for that. All right, well that brings me to my last question here. This is something I ask all the guests on the show. Um, given your experience not only on Substack but just as a writer in general, what's some advice that you would give to writers who are just starting out? Again, whether it's on Substack or otherwise, like what are kind of some of the big lessons you've learned?
Well, I can't really give any advice as to how to find an audience considering my success level at that. But if you youngins will listen to me talk about other things, I think it's important to try to find your own process, I guess, would be one of those things. Because I mean, you've probably seen all the numerous writing advice out there. Oh, you gotta make a draft, or do the draft first, and don't worry about it later. But that's not necessarily true for everybody. Like I myself don't actually have what most people would consider a first draft because I have a plot outline that I just continuously refine and refine and refine. And I start writing scenes for, and I refine those over and over again until I end up with a final draft, never having really done a first draft. Right. So, I'm sure yours doesn't exactly line up with the big, writing advice out there. And you've probably also read conflicting advice as well. The whole plotter versus pantser thing is like a whole thing, which, annoys me because I think most people are actually a hybrid of both, which is not a new concept, right? So I think it's important to find your own process, not just in writing, but like in, creative works and, other things.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good advice. Yeah, I something that I did when I first started writing is I really tried to kind of follow in the footsteps of other writers and like mold myself to like, be as close to them as possible because they were successful. And I just that's not the right approach based on my experience, right? It's more like you said, finding your own process, discovering your own voice and style, because at the end of the day, your success will come about as a result of that, of being true to yourself and doing what works for you, because that will ultimately make you stand out.
Yeah. Although at this point in time, what is success? But I also mean, I think you'll just have a better time.
Yeah, also true. Yes, I agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. In general, you'll enjoy the process more if you find what works for
Yeah.
you. Yeah.
Yeah. I also wrote down some other like random tidbits. Like there's always the figure out what your own strengths and weaknesses are. Like like I mentioned earlier, I don't really enjoy world building, so that's something that I use my other strengths to cover up. And
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a good point.
yeah,
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
yeah, do research. Dig into stuff that interests you, and not necessarily for your writing, like just random things that might interest you, because you never know when there's like a nugget of a thing that you can use as inspiration.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll like always kind of be learning and expanding
Yeah,
your knowledge. Definitely. That's
exactly.
good advice. Yeah.
And the final, I think, the most foundational one to me at least, is if you are bored writing it, then most likely the reader will be bored reading it. So, keep that in mind when you're writing your drafts and refining your story and whatnot, I think.
Yeah, no, that right there is some really good advice. Yeah, if you're not feeling the intended emotions yourself while writing it, it's almost a guarantee that when people read it, they're not going to feel it either. So,
Yeah.
yep, that's really really good advice.
Oh, I guess what comes out of that is also, you kind of just gotta let things go sometimes, or put it on a shelf,
Yeah,
because if you are struggling with, a story, or again, not even just writing, like any sort of creative process, if you're struggling with it, sometimes you just need to either let it go or take a break from it.
yeah. I always say like let the subconscious work the problem. Like if you're banging your head against the wall, just leave it alone. Like you said, go do something else.
Yeah.
And your mind will kind of work the problem, and you'll have a moment later on possibly where you're like, oh wait, that's it, that's what I needed, kind of thing.
Yeah. Or if it doesn't, then maybe you need to let it go.
Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
and
I've
that
had sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's definitely something you learn with time. I think.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, I've had plenty of stories, ideas over the years that, I've always tried to pick up. And it was only like, I have a Falcon Talks article about this, but it was only like a year or two or three maybe ago, that I realized I actually have created these albatrosses around my neck, you know, where I
Hmm.
keep thinking that I'll pick them up and make something out of them, but it's been years and I don't feel any passion for them. So I do need to actually just put them down and move on to the thing that, inspires me and gives me passion at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But that's something where you really have to kind of. It's different for everybody, but it is a really important skill to kind of develop. Is like knowing when to walk away from something, right? When
Right.
it's just not a good
Yeah.
fit for whatever reason.
Yeah.
But that's
And
hard. That's
and
really hard.
yeah. And now that the listener, you have heard all of the things I've said, just keep in mind that what we said might not work for you. So yeah.
No, also a good piece of advice. Yeah, like and when it comes to any kind of writing advice, right? It's exactly like you said. It's like take it with a grain of salt. Do what works for you, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Edward, this was a phenomenal interview. Really excited for people to get their eyes on your work, especially the Red Riding Hood series. The Falcon Talks articles sound phenomenal. I'll be including links to several of these things in the show notes. Right at the top where I mentioned the week's featured guest. So anybody listening, be sure to check those show notes so you can kind of dive into Edward's work here. But thank you again for coming onto the show here. Really excited to see people kind of discover you. And yeah, I'm very excited to watch your audience grow from this point onward.
Oh, thank you, Bradley. It was great coming on the show, and it was great talking to you. Yeah, you you've been very patient with my very random tangents, so thank you for that.
No, the tangents are where the brilliance is, right? That's where the hidden gems are. That's why I love them.
True, true, true. Well, hopefully, like I mentioned earlier, hopefully we can get this one out of the drafts and published.
That is the plan, my friend. All right, and thank you again to Edward for joining me on this week's episode. That was a fantastic interview packed with wisdom and insights for all my fellow writers. And next up, it's time for Next Week on Substack. So, I've been promising this article on how writers can use memes for a few weeks now, and it's becoming a meme in and of itself. I apologize for the delay. I've got a good structure for it. I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to get it done this week for sure. So if you're listening, I'm holding myself accountable. And if I don't get it done this week, I'm going to create that draft lock wearable so it can shock me every week I don't finish it. In the meantime, we'll have our next Power Up prompt tomorrow, and of course, our Mindful Monday checkpoint at the beginning of the coming week. Outside of all that, this week I'm going to be working on some other projects behind the scenes, including edits for the first episode of the Clenchport podcast, which I'm launching in January. And of course, I already have another great guest lined up for next week's podcast, so keep an eye out for that announcement early next week. I've myself been feeling a bit under the weather due to all the cold and snow here, so beyond those things, I think next week I'm going to try to take it easy where I can. But as always, I really appreciate you all being here and joining me each week for the show. It really does mean the world. And with that, we reach the end of another episode. I'm wishing you all a productive week of writing, and this is Bradley Ramsey, signing off.
No! Cut! Cut!
What is it this time, Arnold?
You're not saying it right. It's get to the chopper!
Yes, I understand. Get to the chopper!
No! It's chopper!
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 Oh, this is hopeless. I quit.
No! Get back here! Get to the chopper!